that Gandhiji's Phoenix family, the home seekers from South Africa, may be invited to stay temporarily at Shantiniketan. Although Tagore was not present when Gandhiji visited the community, a heartwarming reception was organized by the teachers and students. Gandhiji stayed for just 1 week, but he so completely won over the people that they were ready to dispense with their cooks and their helpers and do all the work themselves, as Gandhiji would have liked. While this experiment in self-reliance did not continue for a very long time, its memory still survives in the form of a symbolic Gandhi Day observed in Shantiniketan in March, when the helpers enjoy a holiday and students and teachers do all the work. So Tagore and Gandhi met for the first time in March 1915 at Shantiniketan. Their discussions were diverse and not always sober. They would discuss food and diet, among other things. Gandhi's advocacy for fruit and cereal one day met with a quick resistance from Bengali gourmet. Gandhi declared to fry bread in ghee or oil to make puris is to turn good grain into poison. Rabindra answered calmly, "It must be slow poison. I have been eating puris all my life and it has not done me any harm so far." The two leaders, Gandhi and Tagore, had strong ideological differences. It is well known that Tagore did not agree with Gandhi on the methods of the non-cooperation movement, nor did he accept the importance that Gandhi attributed to the repetitive act of charkha spinning. Secretary Rao has already pointed to some of these issues. Seems Tagore was more in favor of individual awakening. You recall the song that's already. Gandhi was more with the political collective. The Bihar earthquake of 1934 provoked a final confrontation. Gandhi, in a public statement, declared provocatively that the earthquake was divine retribution for India's sin in upholding untouchability. Tagore was upset. He was also bewildered and sought a clarification, saying, "We, who are immensely grateful to Mahatma Ji for inducing, by his wonder-working inspiration, freedom from fear and feebleness in the minds of his countrymen, feel profoundly hurt that any words from his mouth may emphasize the elements of unreason in those very minds. Unreason, which is a fundamental source of all the blind powers that drive us against freedom and self-respect." To this, Gandhi insisted on linking once again the physical event with the spiritual unknown and said, "To me, the earthquake was not the caprice of God, nor a result of a meeting of mere blind forces. We do not know all the laws of God, nor their working." While such differences in belief systems may seem unsurmountable, Gandhi wished to be truthful about his relationship with Tagore, and I am repeating what Dr. Rao just mentions. The statement by Gandhi, "I started with a disposition to detect a conflict between Gurudev and myself, but ended with a glorious discovery that there was none." With equal faith in their shared vision of India, an old and ailing Tagore pleaded with Gandhi, and I am quoting from a letter, "I make a fervent appeal to you, accept this institution, Shantiniketan, under your protection, giving it an assurance of permanence. If you consider it to be a national asset, Vishwa Bharati is like a vessel which is carrying the cargo of my life's best treasure, and I hope it will claim special care from my countrymen for its preservation." The legacy of such a civil dialogue must live on. And this perspective is the framework of this symposium presented by the English board of the Sahitya Akademi today as an offering to our great thinkers, Tagore and Gandhi.
Thank you, Professor Manoj Shiraji. I'm sure in the coming sessions, whatever the Manoj Shiraji mentioned. Now, Mr. Chaudhary is going to be mentioned in his inaugural address, will be discussed. Now, I request Mr. Chaudhary to give an inaugural address. Actually, he brought a PowerPoint presentation, beautifully designed, but there was some technical reasons we are unable to. But thank you.
नहीं कोई जरूरत नहीं thank you Dr. Malashila and Dr. Rao for giving me this opportunity to inaugurate this symposium on Tagore and Gandhi dialogues and dichotomies. I find all my friends present here. I see Vashavi Fraser, who was my friend, philosopher and guide at Edinburgh, and now is a family friend. Her husband, Professor Neil Fraser, is also present here. Nice to see you. But the best thing to find Bharati. Bharati Rai, is always a thing of joy to meet her. And when she starts conversation with you, my God, that's wonderful. Rema, Shom, I'm so happy to see you here. And we are all looking forward to listen to your Rabindra story. Radha, I met her just now and I congratulated her for becoming a professor of comparative literature at the university. So nice to see you. You all know she gave us a book of immense value published by Harvard. Rest I don't know. Bindu I never know. I have not met you before. Anita, Arutrana and others. But my friend Alok is there. Oh my God. When did you come, Nirmal? And our surgeon, Professor Chandra, we call him Surgeon because he's Friday for us. Not of one person. Friday belongs to one person, but he's the Friday of everybody on earth. So thank you for coming, and he's General Secretary of CLI, Comparative Literature Association of India, and advisor to so many universities. Thank you very much. Now, in view of the title of this symposium, Tagore and Gandhi, Dialogues and Dichotomies, I thought to speak about their intellectual conflict and companionship. You just heard from both of them that at some time Gandhi said that initially I thought there is quite a lot of differences. Now I don't find any. It is always rewarding for a Bengali brought up on a settled diet of Tagore to bring Gandhi into the discussion and speak about their central philosophical questions regarding a desirable society and a concrete and universal humanism. Questions that have defined Indian public life and contemporary world ideas. Tagore called Gandhi Mahatma, the great soul. Gandhi called Tagore Gurudev, the great preceptor. These two great thinkers of modern India had their strong differences and intellectual conflicts. But at the same time, both realized their deep affection for each other. Professor Malashila has given us a very perceptive introduction to the topic, and she particularly discussed those areas which are maybe academically not that important, but otherwise, without these points which Malashri spelled out just now, we cannot understand the relationship between these two great souls of modern India. The ideas of Tagore are a part of my life. For many years I thought of Gandhi as a strange phenomenon, vending ideas that look terribly 18th century speaking against the British Parliament, law courts, and even railways. But in due course I realized that Gandhi, in his book Hind Swaraj, written in 1909, took the sort of extreme position which a great poet or a visionary is capable of taking. The poet William Blake once said that all extremes open the gates of heaven. Truth is not revealed with liberal views, but with extreme views. As a critique of the planned agenda of the British of civilizing Indians and modernizing India, Gandhi decided to de-glamorize his opponents by criticizing all the icons of Western civilization and said that India is in danger of losing her soul. She must resist it for her own sake and that of the world. Gandhi's approach was not to create a tussle between the indigenous and the foreign, but to warn us about the danger of developing a colonial mentality or mental colonization. Tagore also said in those days that true modernism is freedom of mind, not slavery of taste. It is independence of thought and action, not tutelage under European schoolmasters. Today I see the ideas of Mahatma as well as of Tagore as true bridges to the future. Emotionally I live in Tagore's world, but intellectually I recognize that the 21st century belongs to Gandhi. Tagore is for all time. He cannot be limited within the ambit of a century. For 2 decades after he received the Nobel Prize, he flashed across the western sky like a comet. It was the second decade of the last century, and Rabindra Tagore was already beginning to make an international presence. His works were translated into French by André Gide and into Russian by Boris Pasternak, both Nobel Prize winners. W.B. Yeats, another Nobel laureate, had written the preface to the first edition of Tagore's own translation of the Gitanjali in 1912, and Ezra Pound, in a revised edition in 1930, compared him to Dante. Meanwhile, 22 of Tagore's titles had already been translated in 1917 into immaculate Spanish, mainly through the pen of the Spanish poet Juan Román Jiménez, who later won the Nobel Prize in 1956, and his wife, Genoveva Camprubí, who was an American. The French Nobel laureate Saint-Jean Perse said of Tagore that he lived his poem and lived it integrally with all the integrity of man and of life. In due course, like a comet, he disappeared, but reappeared in the 1960s when the children of neo-romantics like Anna Akhmatova and Ronald S. Harrington and others found in him a sympathetic voice. They responded in particular to his message of anti-materialism, his vision of the spiritual, and his search for beauty in man and nature, which was very familiar to them. They were also attracted by his late poetry, which became less and less like poetry and more like the unadored human voice describing his journey towards greater and greater honesty. The comet again disappeared for a short while, to be brought back to the sky by a young English modernist poet, William Radice, who translated Tagore's poetry from original Bengali and shattered the myth of Tagore as just a mystical poet of the East. Radici's work marked a new initiative in the European understanding of Tagore. Not only lovers of literature, but social and political scientists and thinkers from different fields of human knowledge took great interest in Tagore's ideas of nationalism, cosmopolitanism, new education, and the changing nature of violence, and its bureaucratization, and also took notice of his notion of unity of mankind. Let me quote just two distinguished thinkers. First, a social and political theorist, Israel Berlin, who believed in counter-enlightenment and advocated an irreducibly pluralist ethic ontology, saw the value in Tagore's unique position and said many years ago in his well-known book, Sense of Reality, that Indians ought to be proud of the rarest of all gifts of nature, a poet of genius who even in moment of acute crisis unwaveringly told them only what he saw, only the truth. The second comes from the altogether different field of chemistry. Ilya Prigogine, a 1984 chemistry Nobel laureate, went so far as to say in the same year that curiously enough, the present evolution of science is running in the direction stated by the great Indian poet Tagore. Gandhi was different. It was Ashish Nandi who once remarked, as it recorded in his book Talking India, that there are 4 Gandhis who survived after Gandhi's death in 1948. The first Gandhi is that of the Indian state, and second that of the Gandhians. The third Gandhi is that of the eccentrics, and the fourth is the Gandhi who is basically not read, but only heard of, almost like a rumor. Ashish Nandi says that this later Gandhi survives in odd places, in places like Dalai Lama, or Aung San Suu Kyi, or Nelson Mandela, or even survives in movements of various kinds, in, say, anti-nuclear or environmental movements. And now my addition in Munna Bhai's of Bollywood films to the utter discomfiture and chagrin of the Indian elite. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was an ordinary common man with extraordinary conviction who sold his wife's jewelry to study law in London, returned a barrister, but because of his moral uprightness and poor articulation, could not become successful in his profession, and like thousands of poverty-stricken, illiterate and unemployed laborers, signed a girmit, a colloquial of agreement, to practice law for a year in South Africa in the first instance, and sailed for the new country in 1893. This was the beginning of the saga of a common man, who, by his ability to stand up for truth and champion the cause of justice, was transformed from an ordinary man into a great man, and ultimately a Mahatma, an appellation used for the most respectable and distinguished person in India. This transformation from Mohandas to Mahatma was full of uncertainties, sacrifices, renunciations, sufferings, and humiliations. Yet his dauntless courage and spiritual aspiration showed him the path of success. Gandhi's struggle to bring honor and dignity to the lives of thousands and thousands of Indians in a foreign country, South Africa. With his newly discovered weapon, Satyagraha, the philosophy of non-violence or passive resistance, gave rise to a model of how to live life and reach self-realization. Satyagraha is a relentless search for truth and a determination to teach truth through non-violence means which was to become the most powerful force in India's struggle for freedom. General Smuts, the biggest adversity in South Africa, later referred to the memories of those eventful years on Gandhi's 70th birthday. I quote, "In jail he had prepared for me a pair of sandals, which he presented to me when he was set free. I had worn those sandals for many a summer since then, even though I may feel that I am not worthy to stand in the shoes of so great a man." Gilbert Murray wrote about Gandhi in the Hibbert Journal of 1914. Persons in power should be very careful how they deal with a man who cares nothing for sensual pleasure, nothing for riches, nothing for comfort or praise or promotion, but is simply determined to do what he believes to be right. He is a dangerous and uncomfortable enemy because his body, which you can always conquer, gives you so little purchase upon his soul. Mahatma Gandhi, a great saint, though at the same time an astute politician, and Gurudev, an appellation given to Tagore, to indicate a great preceptor, but at the same time a poet, are examples and lessons for scholars who study the great debates of the 20th century between different writers, scholars, philosophers, and national leaders. Nirvana, the philosopher, calls them two banks of the same river, separated yet united. And Romarola, the French novel Lloyd, hails them as two great minds, both moved by mutual admiration and esteem, but as fatally separated in their feeling as a philosopher can be from an apostle. They met together for the first time in Shantiniketan, mentioned by Mala in detail about it, in February 1915. But it was not until 1919 that their correspondence would take the vital and critical form that made such a major contribution to the future growth of India. Their worldviews and their life missions, the freedom of India for Gandhi and the unity of mankind for Tagore. Their tributes to each other were unreserved. Their differences on major political issues were fundamental. Tagore did not approve of the edges of Gandhi's thought that could be read as not progressive, though in hindsight we are forced to wonder whether the lack of progressivism lay in Gandhi's ideas or in the perception of his contemporaries. That is very, very important for us to understand. Let us not forget that Tagore or Nehru was part of urban middle-class culture, and the majority of Indians are probably not affected by that culture. Gandhi was the only one to connect with the rural India directly, though he himself was a product of the city. Therefore, there was in Gandhi a lament for the loss of culture, a savage critique of Western civilization, much more savage than in the case of Tagore. However, he was candid enough to say, preservation of one's own culture does not mean contempt for that of others, but requires assimilation of the best that there may be in all the cultures. Similarly, instead of going for a synthesis between the East and the West, Tagore's theory was that there is no other way open to us in the East but to go along with Europeanization and to go through it. Only through this voyage into the foreign and strange can we win back our own selfhood. This is a wonderful analysis done by one famous philosopher of India, that he never wanted to have a synthesis between East and West. He wanted us to have the path of Europeanization. And through that voyage, ultimately to realize our own selfhood. This is a movement of moving beyond your narrow self. It is by stepping outside of ourselves that we can be saved from ourselves and can realize the harmonious nature of the whole, or the unity of mankind. Going through does not mean acceptance, but understanding everything in a larger perspective. One can see an unfortunate tendency among modern historians to reduce the Gandhi-Tagore debate, which according to Jawaharlal Nehru was the great debate of the 20th century, into a very simplistic version. 20th century, into a very simplistic version, seeing it merely as a matter of superstition versus rational thinking. There is an easy way of comparing them. One is superstitious, the other is rational. Or the one epitomizes darkness of tradition, and the other is enlightenment of modernity. Or East versus West, or a poet versus an ascetic. One cannot draw too neat a contrast between these two great minds, because the difference was largely of degree. The Western approach is primarily binary and not holistic. As a result, even a person like Amartya Sen, the Nobel Prize winning Indian, makes a mistake. But this kind of a mistake is inevitable. We go for this kind of comparison, even if it sounds extremely odious. Even Lord Bhigu Parekh, an internationally known political scientist and multiculturalist, having a deep thinking mind, misinterpreted this kind of a glib understanding of the differences between Tagore and Gandhi, and said that Gandhi used it as a rhetorical strategy by calling Tagore a poet and himself a humble man of action, and thereby, one, distinguish himself fairly, sharply from Tagore, and at the same time, two, reduce the impact of Tagore's criticism by warning his readers that Tagore's judgments on matters political were not to be taken seriously. Don't take it seriously. I cannot imagine that Gandhi, who after Tagore's death had said in his condolence message that there were hardly any public activity on which he had left no impress of his powerful personality, and that he was an ardent nationalist, would use this kind of an artifice or duplicity to lower Tagore's position in the public eye? No, I can't believe it. Showing him as just an ivory tower poet without any understanding of the world of action. Certainly not. They were not close friends, but had great respect for each other. One of the best examples of this friendship was the incident of Bihar earthquake, you mentioned it, in 1934. In reply to Gandhi's statement about the earthquake, that it was God's chastisement for the sin of untouchability, Tagore asked on 16 February 1934, how could Mahatma emphasize the elements of unreason? Mala has already said all these things, I am not saying it again. But I will just say one thing, that when there were tremendous criticism against Gandhi on this earthquake statements made by him, Tagore could not control himself. And he made a very powerful statement, and I quote, "To one really great, the real adulation as well as the cheap sneers of the mob means very little, and I know Mahatmaji carries that greatness with him." Within days of criticism which started pouring in all the newspapers here and there, then Tagore could not control himself and made this statement, though he was the initiator of criticizing Tagore or Gandhi on this point. Now, what I feel, as Ashish Nandi also thinks, you know this also, is that Gandhi, by his statement, was hinting at collective responsibility, and that was not an exclusive conception. President Clinton publicly apologized for the sin of slavery of his country, for which he was not, nor was the white community of his time was responsible. Even so, Clinton apologized, being the inheritor of a culture under which once upon a time slavery was practiced. Ramchandra Gandhi, the grandson of Gandhi and a distinguished philosopher, with the help of the theory of action within the notion of collectivization of thought of Simone Weil, a positive explanation of the statement of Mahatma. He gives a positive explanation of the statement of Mahatma Gandhi on behalf of Earth. In their differences also a level of decorum and gravity was maintained. In this regard, one can refer to the controversial Tagore-Gandhi debate of 1921 on Charkha, hand-operated spinning wheel, passive resistance and non-cooperation movement, or burning of foreign clothes. Tagore was apprehensive that passive resistance would turn violent. He thought that spinning of the wheel would not generate ideas, and that our poverty was not due to our lack of sufficient threat, but to our lack of vitality, our lack of unity, and that burning of clothes would hurt our economy. Gandhi called Tagore in an article in Young India of 27 April 1921, and I quote, "the great sentinel," but defended non-cooperation movement and Charkha as a means of livelihood to many poor people, and said in the end, "I found it impossible to soothe suffering patients with a song from Kabir. The hungry millions asked for one poem, invigorating food." In reply to this, Tagore, in his speech on call of truth at the University Institute in Calcutta, spoke against it. He said, and I quote, "When the early bird awakens, its awakening is not merely for the purpose of looking for food. Its too untiring wings accept the call of the sky, the joy of seeing the light, and makes him burst out into song. The consciousness of the universal man of today calls out to our consciousness." Tagore made at least one thing clear, that if Romanticism was a movement for national freedom, which it turned to be, then it also accepted the universality of the Enlightenment. Mahatma Gandhi, in his reply in Young India, chose to point out to that bird which flies in the sky early in the morning and said, I quote, "But I have had the pain of watching birds who for want of strength could not coax into a flutter of their wings." In Indian Romanticism around 1920 and 21 and thereafter, as well as, the hungry bird also found its place. Both bore their differences rather lightly and showed their love and admiration for more deeply. Once Gandhi requested Tagore to spin the Charkha. Tagore immediately responded, "You write a poem, I shall spin the wheel." In spite of their great love and regard for each other, they had fundamental differences on some major political issues, and this paradox is difficult to figure out. Even Tagore was frequently driven to his wits' end, trying to understand why Gandhi did what he did in the first place. And moreover, why the Indian public always seemed to follow him, no matter how irrational he appeared to be to his colleagues in politics and to the non-political people like Tagore. But in but this in no way affected their close friendship and understanding of each other. The best example of this is that just 1 year after his most powerful and comprehensive statement against the non-violent, non-cooperation movement, which came out in October 1921 in the Bengali journal Provashi, Tagore wrote his play Mukto Dhara in 1922. Though a critique of the non-violent, non-cooperation movement, Tagore surprisingly gave a profound expression to his faith in the Gandhian ideal of non-violent popular movement. The words on non-violent by the protagonist of the play. It is unthinkable that on one side he was so critical of non-violent movement, and on the other side he used the character of his play Muktadhara to describe the values of non-violent movement. I just quote three, four sentences. The Dhananjay, who was the hero, exhorts his followers to realize the great power of non-beating. Can't you show him what non-beating is? That needs too much strength, I suppose, asked the follower. Beating the waves won't stop the storm, but hold your rudder steady and you will. The criticism of Raja Ram Mohan Roy by Gandhi created quite a stir during that time. Do you all know? Raja Ram Mohan Roy came to England in 1831 and as the ambassador of the Mughal Emperor Akbar Shah II and died in 1833 in Bristol. The criticism by Gandhi was to call Raja a pygmy for thinking and writing in English. This disturbed Tagore quite a bit, not so much for Gandhi's opposition to English as for calling Raja a pygmy, who was a champion of English education. Tagore, in a letter to Andrews from Zurich, said that he had the comprehensiveness of mind to be able to realize the fundamental unity of spirit in the Hindu, Mohammedan and Christian cultures. Therefore, he represented India in the fullness of truth, and this truth is based not upon rejection but on perfection. We all know that this word pygmy was deleted from his from Gandhi's volumes of collection of his essays and writings later on Gandhi's own request, but Gandhi did not did not stop criticizing Raja Ram Mohan Roy for his favoring English. That he continued. Stung by the criticism, Gandhi immediately published his reply in Young India and made that famous oft-quoted statement, "I hope I am as great a believer in free air as a great poet. I do not want my house to be walled in all the sides and my windows to be stuffed. I want the cultures of all the lands to be blown about my house as freely as possible, but I refuse to be blown off my feet by any." These lines are engraved in school and college buildings across the land and have recently acquired a fresh lease of life outside India. Thus, as said by Ramachandra Guha, Gandhi's words have been cited in the debates on curriculum reform in the divided campuses of the elite American universities. They are now indeed an argument-clinching mantra for our multicultural times. For Tagore, India was not territorial, but ideational. He said that I love India, but my India is an idea, not a geographical expression. He further said that the word nation is not in our language. India has never had a real sense of Western nationalism. Society is at the core of India's civilization, and politics is at the core of Western civilization. And hence the importance which Europe gave to freedom, we gave to the liberation of the soul. If one understands Tagore's views that India's unity is a social fact, not a political agenda, it becomes easy to understand that for Tagore, universal nationalism is an inclusive plural concept of a nation. even today, after 68 years of our freedom, we still feel that socially we are so much down in compared to other nations. And this is exactly what Tagore was hinting at. Tagore wanted first the society to improve and develop society and all the social ills to be removed. But we could not do even today. And as a result, our political institution is in danger of breaking down. You may say that you are giving a prophecy which will be proved wrong. Maybe I will be happy if it is proved wrong, but it is going to happen like that in future. That's what I feel. Because we have not cared to improve in any way our society, are not in any way to care for developing our education properly. There is rampant corruption in the educational institutions, and we have failed in every respect for social upliftment of the people of this country. His partnership, it is very difficult to understand this concept. That why we need social upliftment before India's freedom. Just as people found it difficult to understand how a man like Gandhi could bring freedom into a country with the help of salt and chakra, as the medieval devotional poets brought a social religious revolution with the help of metaphors like chadar, jewelry, seeds and earth. His participation in the Hindu Mela from the age of 14 to his renouncing knighthood at the age of 58 because of the Jallianwala Bagh, and then at the age of 80 his forcefully expression of anti-imperialist viewpoints in his last stirring lecture, The Crisis in Civilization. There was no politics. In this lecture he described the impertinent challenge presented by the imperial ruler to our conscience. Yet even then there was no political slant to his message. For Tagore, love of one's country is not to be focused on the state but on the well-being of one's fellow members, consistent with due regard for that of the wider humanity. Gandhi broadly shared Tagore's views. For him too, the stronger the society, the less it needed to rely on the state to maintain its unity and stability. For both, a country is the creation of its citizens and becomes their own, becomes theirs when and to the extent that they identify with and care for each other. However, Gandhi was definitely more practical than Tagore and wanted people to concentrate their attention and energy on their country first and thereafter on humankind at large. Gandhi's roadmap was from nationalism to internationalism, while for Tagore's, both were to be accepted as a single unity. Tagore referring the differences between them thus lay in their different attitudes to life. Tagore, referring to the first mantra of Upanishad, would always say, rejoice and renounce. And when an English journalist asked Gandhi to give in 5 words the meaning of life, Gandhi said, why 5? I will give you in 3. Renounce and rejoice. This is a basic difference. One wants to rejoice and then renounce. The other wants to have renunciation first and then rejoice that renunciation. This is very difficult to achieve in one's life, that you renounce everything and then rejoice. Anyway, both were highly concerned for each other in spite of their differences on fundamental issues. In Pune, you know, Reva, you are going to give that song to us, that Jivana Japana Shukaya. He was so much disturbed by Gandhi's hunger strike. After 31 days, McDonald was not accepting to remove that award. Then he took a train and came to Yamada jail, and in the meantime, McDonald, the Prime Minister of Britain, accepted to take back the award, and everything went all right. That was the day, Monday, when Gandhi would not talk, he would not speak. He gave in a chit something to Tagore, it was written, please sing a song. At that time Tagore sang Jivano Japuno Shubhaya Jai. Reva is going to sing that. But perhaps we have yet to realize that there were two great lonely men, said not by me, but by R.K. Dasgupta, and I accept it totally. In spite of their tremendous popularity, and that they clashed on some principles because they placed truth above everything else. And in this way, they were always in close agreement. Both had the courage and spirit to speak alone and walk alone. It is not astonishing that because of this, Gandhi particularly loved one of the songs of Tagore. You all know that. What is the song? Jyoti Tortakshule Nyumnash. Thank you very much. They will start.
Thank you, Professor Nacholaji, for a very thoughtful thing. It's not the inaugural address, it's rather the keynote address to the topic what Professor Maharashi has designed. It's good that Professor Maharashi has given a very different kind of topics, like perspectives on women and Gandhi and China. Those areas Professor Chaudhary has not touched. At least something left out to those speakers. It is rather difficult to the next two chairpersons how they are going to be, because almost everything Professor Chaudhary has covered in his inaugural address, or whatever we can say, it is a rather scholarly keynote address more than inaugural address. Thank you, sir. I am sure on his lecture also in the coming sessions you will deliberate. Because now we don't have a time, otherwise we would have made some kind of question answer session. But for inaugural address, we never allow the question answer for the inaugural address. We have the session we started half an hour delay, but we are in time because we served tea also inside. Otherwise, there is a tea break. So without giving any break, we will continue the next session, which is going to be chaired by Professor Bharti Ray, and there are three very scholars we have, senior scholars, Professor Ferozeshah and Professor Reba Som, and Professor Chaudhary ji. Again and again he mentioned that he will sing some Tagore's, and also Professor Radha Chakravarti is this. Now I will ask my colleague Gitanjali ji to introduce the scholars and the chairperson. And I think in this session we can have a question answer session after the presentation of these three scholars. And this session we have to be strictly closed at 1 p.m. because there is a lunch at 1 p.m. So I request the chair to maintain the time. 1 o'clock we should close. You can continue up to 1 o'clock. You can have a question answer if Dr. President sir about the yeah.
Generated the ideas that became famous in this national interchange. Post Bhattacharya, Gandhi held a high degree of political power in the subcontinent, while Rabindra was a enthusiast of intellectual brilliance. So, To Call the Truth, published in August 1921, was 19 pages in Ferozeshah Akademi. One translated sentiment, same year in October, which encapsulates the gist of their debate in this first phase of national encounter, which questions the method, the path that India should adopt to gain freedom. Interestingly, both dwell on two tenets, the tenets of truth and love, which become central to what they say to each other. When this debate in the print arena begins, we know that Rabindra has already published his essays on nationalism in 1917. We also know that in 1909, in a fever of composition, Gandhi had composed Hind Swaraj. So, in the Call of Truth, Rabindranath shows how man's creative potential sets him apart from all other creatures, something that he has also, he goes on to develop all through his life and puts together with several compiled essays in The Religion of Man, gathered together on his Pivot Lectures in 1931. Here Rabindranath shows that man is capable of self-determination that has evolved from a parasitic dependency for progressive independence, moving from chipping flint to melting iron and ultimately hammering it into shape. This is the analogy of creative blacksmith. In the great sentiment, Gandhiji is unwilling to believe that this progress of man is evidence of his advancement. And he asserts that men who possess these material tools cannot, when they are inflicted by hunger, sing hymns of love and goodwill. I started off with the word bard. It sounds very much like bird, and I will come back to that later on. Gandhiji goes back to the humble spinning wheel, which Indranath has mentioned, the charkha, positing that it is a tool for instilling the dignity of labor in a nation of subjected people. It symbolizes self-reliance and inculcates the habit of activity on a mass scale. Gandhiji's call was for collective activity, but as Rabindranath sees it, it does not allow for individual choice and agency. Rabindranath distinguishes between the inner and outer existence. In Shabana earlier, he had said that English-speaking public had taken to begging for rights from the dominating power. And he says, begging from whom? From the foreigner, who does not belong to the nation. It is a parasitic dependence. He mentions the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League, and he goes on to talk about the Englishman who relates to the outside man, who is ephemeral, ineffective, an illusion, and a maya, not an illusion, but a delusion. So here they stand, the outside world stands for darkness, marked by its transience, whereas the country is an eternal truth by its very presence. This can be related, and as a lot of us recognize that Rabindranath remained a romantic. He was modern, but he was a romantic who believed in the intrinsic capability of man to progress. And we find this reflected, the whole idea of the lamb in Abraham's famous book, The Mirror and the Lamb. It is positive, it is the affirmation of the soul, the eternal truth, the nation with a small n, our civic society, which has evolved through settlement, integration, cultural relation, and interchange, embodying the spirit of the nation. The outside is represented in the nation with capital N, a state power wielded by the foreigner. India needs to associate with the world, with other nations, to take a place in the world, in a great conglomeration of nations. Rabindranath is worried about India's isolation. He speaks about the regression to the forest and the cave, and we must not make the mistake of conflating this idea with Rabindranath's own advocacy for the forest community, the Tagore. The distinction here is between the primitive man and the guru, the teacher. Interestingly, Rabindranath describes the alien government as a chameleon. He says that it can change its skin like a chameleon. But he also says that such a government, while it comes from outside, can also come from inside. It is almost a prophecy of what Franz Fanon was all about in The Wretched of the Earth, in the pitfalls of national consciousness, where the once colonized can don the white mask of the colonizer. Such a situation, Rabindra says, can be avoided if the true nature of man, his inner nature, his inherent powers, is allowed to find a voice in the people to create their own country. Rajiv Malik has said that Tagore was one who always values creation over construction, imagination over reason, expression over want, and values the natural and the organic. For Rabindranath, man's country is comprised of society which is the creation of his own inner nature. Once again, he stresses that begging for benefits is paying out in soul value for what we purchase in material advantage. He warns against anger and greed as self-defeatist, and he advocates a calm born of a deep determination to see the inner self realized. He has seen the troubles of the Swadeshi days after the first partition of Bengal, and he has retreated to the idea that the inner self needs to be realized before we can understand the idea of full freedom. So just to reiterate what I've been saying so far, that Rabindranath's country is an eternal truth, a nation with a small n. Man has an inner existence which is like the lamp shedding light. Man's inner nature is moral. He is endowed with an intellect, the seat of reason, his mind. His creative power finds expression in truth and love. And counter to this is the outside world, the material world, shrouded in darkness. It is an outside Maya, a delusion, in which the foreigner, the transient, is just an accident. And the outer world is ruled by greed and anger. Shokshati Bhattacharya's biography of intellectual biography of Tagore has a wonderful chapter on the inner life, Dichotomies, as it is the teacher. Rabindranath gives two examples from the animal world, that of the bee and that of the spider. Both of them are great workers. They create the hive, they store the nectar, but the bee cannot make it. The spider uses meticulous, it's meticulous gift to fashion the web, but what they both lack is the spirit of inquiry, the spirit of unity that emanate from the inner life. So Rabindranath believed that the educated elite, educated through English, cannot, just one section cannot give leadership to a country. It has to come from all sections. And this is where Gandhi comes in, because he succeeded. Interestingly, Rabindranath talks about Burke, Gladstone, Mazzini, and Garibaldi, and in Hind Swaraj, Gandhi also talks about Mazzini and Garibaldi. The motivating, galvanizing of the masses that has been made possible because of Gandhi, because he appeared, to quote Tagore, he stood at the door of the destitute millions, clad as one of themselves, and talking to them in their own language. Who else has felt so many men of India to be of his own flesh and blood? Gandhi built the hitherto imagined community of India into an imaginable, even a tangible community of a unified nation. Quote from Tagore, at the touch of truth, the pent-up forces of the souls are set free. As soon as love stood at India's door, it flew open. All hesitation, all holding back, vanished. Truth, capital T, awakened truth, small t. In the Mahatma, Rabindranath sees the birth of freedom. It is significant that for Rabindranath, Gandhiji is truth and love, and is recognized by India's millions as such. Truth stands for the freedom that is man's birthright and indivisible reality, and the nation, that is civic society, is intrinsic to his very existence, a continuation of his being, as it were. Truth withstands negation and argument. Love is the compelling force that embodies compassion and empathy for one's fellow countrymen. India's spirit has responded to the call of Shakti, the power that comes from truth, embodied in Gandhi. So the outside forces have resisted and of greed can be resisted by love and truth, and love leads to freedom as it liberates us at the very center of our being, enabling us to withstand the outward pressure of greed. Mind and heart, which are the seat of intellect and love respectively, are dual aspects of man's created inner soul. I'm just going to skip a little. It wasn't what can truly awaken the country, just to stress again, our truth and love, the golden rod that awakens the nation and the society. It wasn't the Congress Party, but truth and love, embodied in the Mahatma, that turned the magic on. Freedom is its complete awakening, in full self-expression. God has given the Mahatma the voice that can call our long-awaited opportunity. Once again, Carlyle's Messiah seems to have arrived here. So Rabindranath's analogy of the bee is that of a tribe who have perfected a craft, but it is, after all, a mechanical habit. The spider's meticulous web, like the bee's hive, is a brainless job. Man's greatest powers are within. Repetitive tasks, which the spinning of the charka entails, cannot allow man to find his inner truth and freedom. Tagore gives another interesting example, that of Sparta and Athens. One practices abstinence and regimentation. Sparta, and Athens has the power of the artistic fullness. We know which one has remained to tell us the truth. So, I'll just move on to the great sentiment. However, Gandhi offers an impassioned defense of the cult of the charka, where the charka is completed with truth and love. The call of the spinning wheel for him is the noblest of all, because it is the call of love, and love is Swaraj. It is a transitional vehicle that will provide a turning point for the nation. And he goes on to talking about spurning of foreign cloth. At the beginning of his essay, he talks about the Bard of Shantiniketan in agreement, saying that yes, he guards the nation against bigotry, lethargy, intolerance, ignorance, and inertia. However, in his deep deliberation, Gandhi has come to the conclusion that it is his reasoning which compels him to believe that the ideal instrument signifying plenty is the charka. Gandhi equates himself with reason. And contrary to Rabindranath's anxiety about the educated taking to spinning, he feels that the educated haven't yet learned or grasped fully the truth about the charka. When Rabindranath has said, we cannot afford to lose our mind for the sake of our external gain. When Mahatma Gandhi has declared war against the tyranny of the machine, which is oppressing the whole world, we are all enrolled under his banner. But we must refuse to accept as our ally the illusion-haunted, magic-ridden slave mentality. And here comes the whole idea of the burning of cloth. It's interesting that both of them use the word sin. And while Rabindranath says that he cannot consider foreign cloth as impure, and he says untruth is impure, he goes on to say that the clothes to be burnt are not mine, but belong to those who most sorely need them. And he asks, but how can we expiate the sin of the forcible destruction of clothes which might have gone to women whose nakedness is actually keeping them prisoners, unable to stir out of the privacy of their homes? Clothes stand between dignity and the sense of powerlessness that comes with a threadbare existence that engenders shame. On the contrary, Gandhi says wearing foreign garments is a sin. He's using the same word, to drive from, both of them use the same word, to drive from two very different points. He also uses the word shame, and he says, in burning my foreign clothes, I burn my shame. He tells Rabindranath that if the poet Navy belonged to the Flat Code, he would have returned him to the Navy. However, we must remember that Rabindranath had already carried on many experiments. He had spoken about this in Khoribaide. He had sent his own son, Rabindranath, his student Shantosh Majumdar, and his son-in-law Rabindranath Gangopadhyay to study agriculture, not to Oxford and Cambridge, not to be barristers. And it was a vision. He wanted them to come back and rejuvenate India by training as agriculturalists. And ultimately, we know about freeing, which under the impetus of Elmhurst found true expression and rural engagement beyond Shantiniketan. So, just to sum up what Gandhi says, he equates the charkha with truth, love, and Swaraj. The call of the spinning wheel is the noblest of all, he says. He calls it a sacrament, assigning it divine sanction and status. And he conflates non-cooperation with a retreat into ourselves, a retirement within ourselves. This is an inner self that is very different from Rabindranath's creative intellect, which resides in the mind of man. For Gandhiji, what India has to offer to the world is the potent message of non-cooperation, which must share with the world. He answers Rabindranath's concern about India's isolation by saying that Indian nationalism is not exclusive, not aggressive, nor destructive. It is health-giving, religious, and therefore humanitarian. And how many minutes? 2? 3? I'm finished. Okay. So, awakening of, I just want to end with the bird. Rabindranath talks about a joyous bird which sings at the joy of light and begins its search for food. Indranatha has already spoken about the image of the bird which, for want of strength, could not be forced to flutter its wings. Gandhiji assigns the poet the role of singer for tomorrow. His voice is not relevant today. For Gandhiji, the poet speaks as a visionary, not as a realist. Gandhiji finds poetry superfluous at present times. I have found it impossible to soothe suffering patients with a song from Kabir as the hungry need invigorating food, which according to him can only be effectively realized through the spinning of the charkha. I would like to ask, at the time of a nation's awakening, can the national bird, bard, not sing?
Thank you. But we will not go for question answer. 3 papers we will take together. Please. Otherwise, there will be no time. Dr. Shaw, Deva Shaw, Tagore and Gandhi agreed to disagree.
Tagore and Gandhi agreed to disagree, a civilized dialogue. And I have chosen this title of submission rather carefully, keeping in mind the great contrast that the Tagore-Gandhi debate offers with the tu-tu-men-na exchanges of politicians today aired on mainstream television. 8 years senior to Gandhi, Tagore dressed him as Mahatma and respected him as a great sentinel. while Gandhi addressed Tagore as Gurudev. They have contrasting viewpoints and variations of the day, which we've all heard in the course of the various presentations, but they aired them with reason and conviction in their letters and published articles, and I feel that the greatest importance of these debates lies in the intellectual discourse that was created, against the background of which younger politicians like Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose could clarify their own impressions on envisaging India. Now, Nehru has been quoted several times here, and because he did write so succinctly on the subject, and I can't resist again quoting him, because this really sums up these two people, and this has not been quoted before, where he says, and I quote, Tagore and Gandhi have undoubtedly been the two outstanding and dominating figures of India in this first half of the 20th century. It is instructive to compare and contrast them. No two persons could be so different from one another in their makeup or temperaments. Tagore, the aristocratic artist turned democrat with proletarian sympathies, represented essentially the cultural tradition of India, the tradition of accepting life in the fullness thereof, and going through it with song and dance. Gandhi, more a man of the people, almost the embodiment of the Indian peasant, represented the other ancient tradition of India, that of renunciation and asceticism. And yet, Tagore was primarily the man of thought, Gandhi of concentrated and ceaseless activity. Both in their different ways had a world outlook, and both were at the same time wholly Indian. They seemed to present different but harmonious aspects of India and to complement one another. Tagore was an early entry into the politics of agitation in India, and in the widespread turmoil following Bengal partition in 1905, he supported wholeheartedly the Swadeshi movement. Endorsement of encouragement of indigenous Scottish industries, many products of which he happily endorsed in advertisements, despite their dubious quality. Marching in processions, singing soul-strengthening songs that he composed on the occasion, such as the famous Akla Chorare. Tying of rakhis of goodwill on Muslim colleagues and co-workers in the hope of fostering communal harmony, and raising funds for encouraging national education. In all of these, Tagore's active support displayed his deep commitment to the national cause. Yet, when Gandhi gave the call for non-cooperation and boycott in 1921, Tagore decided to remain aloof. Staunch Gandhians in Bengal like Acharya Prafulla Chandra Rai openly disagreed, while writers of newspaper articles wondered at the volte-face of the poet. But Tagore had drawn his own lessons from his past involvement in the Swadeshi campaign. He felt it irresponsible to inspire students to leave their studies and boycott educational institutions, or it led them to the blind alley of despair. He explained, and I quote, "The anarchy of emptiness never tempts me, even when it is resorted to as a temporary measure. Such rigorous measures merely lead to non-education, invoking a fierce joy of annihilation." We must also remember that this was the period when Tagore was laying the foundation of his cherished University of Shantiniketan on the principle of cultural cooperation between the East and the West, and raising funds for it in Europe and USA. Vishwa Bharati was established in 1918 and had as its motto the celebration of world culture and its invitation to the nest of his university. Therefore, it's hardly surprising that Tagore should remain unenthused by Gandhi's call to boycott Western education and values, which he felt amounted to spiritual suicide. Perhaps, and we've spoken of this before, the poet's most celebrated dissent from the Mahatma was regarding the call of the Charkha. What he really objected to was Gandhi's formula of compulsory spelling, which would, of course, Gandhi had explained, which would be economically beneficial to India's masses, besides strengthening them spiritually. But the poet was unconvinced. He lamented that the prescriptive tone of the call would suppress the free spirit of the individual. And Tagore declared he was unable to accept the terrible habit of blindly obeying orders. He felt that the logic of boycotting foreign cloth was essentially grounded in economic science, and should not be made into a fictitious moral dictum with a magical formula that foreign cloth is impure and therefore should be burned. Gandhi's response was well reasoned, and he argued that charkha had been adopted not from blind faith, but keeping in mind the economic reality of the villages where the majority of Indians lived, and their enforced idleness could be employed through spinning, and their self-determination and growth would be promoted. He also confessed that he didn't make any sharp distinction between economics and ethics, but he did conclude that it was a sin to wear foreign cloth. And what was Tagore's response? I quote this: "Poems I can spin, Gandhiji, songs and plays I can spin, but of your precious cotton, what a mess I will make." The poet's innate aversion to diktats of any kind found expression again several years later. In 1939, when Subhash Chandra Bose was edged onto the Indian National Congress, of which he had been re-elected president, the poet was pained. Hailing Subhash as Desh Nayak, or the nation's leader, Tagore was confident that fresh blood was needed to enter the public arena, and politics had to be rescued, particularly Bengal politics, from a sense of despondency and lack of purpose. Tagore's pleas with Gandhi yielded little, and his intercession on behalf of Subhash drew the comment that Tagore should stay out of the controversy, as Subhash has been acting like a spoiled child. Although Tagore and Gandhi had taken sharply contrasting positions with regard to particular issues and programs, on one issue they had similar thinking, and this is the concept of nation. They were both non-believers in the concept of India becoming a monocultural nation state according to Western notions. Yet they were fiercely patriotic, and often this is misunderstood, that were they anti-nationalist and yet they were patriotic? The reason is, how did they define the word nation? Gandhi was convinced that India's salvation could come by invoking the society's conscience and by working through indigenous models, instead of relying on the sole value of the impersonal ballot box. Introduction of Western institutions in an Indian milieu, Gandhi said, would create an English spun without the English. Development should be on a cooperative basis at a panchayat level, and that would ensure local self-government and ensure a perfect democracy. This would be a state of enlightened anarchy, where each person would become his own ruler. And this was a concept that was echoed by Tagore in his famous song, Amra Shobai Raja, Amader Ei Rajar Rajate. We are all kings in our reign of kings. What Tagore did was to make a sharp distinction between the nation of the West and the spirit of the West. He was a severe critic of the nation of the West, because for him it was a mechanical, soulless entity which was going to forcibly bind India into an artificial structure held in position by impersonal laws, which he found wouldn't work because India was a world in miniature. Instead, he pleaded for the spirit of the West, which would have enlightenment values of equality, reason, scientific progress, which could be invoked to reform certain inherent social weaknesses in India, such as communal differences and gender disparity. And he felt that only a fundamental change in attitude could ensure meaningful reform. In fact, one of his rather blunt but so correct comments was, the real difficulty is for the Hindus and Muslims to give up their respective prejudices which keep them apart. That is where the problem now rests. To the Hindu, the Musliman is impure. For the Musliman, the Hindu is a kafir. And therefore, Tagore went to the extent of saying that atheism, straightforward atheism, was preferable to the delusion of religion, the satanic bestiality which wears the garb of religion. Now, Gandhi, on the other hand, while working avidly for Hindu-Muslim harmony, was rooted in his Hindu identity. He believed religion was important. He believed that urban modern civilization was becoming irreligious. He justified the varnashram of caste, saying that class divisions existed all over the world. The problem was that equality among the castes had been eroded. His dream was of an ideal Ram Rajya after independence, when economic freedom would ensure that the humblest would be equal to the tallest, and a moral freedom would ensure pacifism, so that armed strength was redundant. Despite his Hindu rhetoric, Gandhi's religion embraced all faiths. He advised a reading of the Quran and Gita by everyone, so that there was a mutual understanding among the different communities. As he wrote, Hindu-Muslim unity is not less important than the spinning wheel. It is the breath of life. On the question of gender equality too, Gandhi's position was not unlike his approach to Varnashram. In other words, he recognized the different roles and responsibilities of men and women in society while championing their equality of rights. Having drawn women into the national movement, which was a unique initiative, which saw women participating with men in mass campaigns, he was careful to ensure that their participation be restricted to pickets and marches. He believed that men and women had separate missions in life as breadwinners and homemakers, and he was unwilling to allow women to go beyond their prescribed role. As he put it in his colorful imagery, in trying to ride the horse that man rides, she brings herself and him both down. There is as much bravery in keeping one's home in order and condition as there is in defending it against attack from outside. In fact, he felt something very degrading and vulgar about women being called to shoulder the rifle for the protection of the heart. Tagore, on the other hand, could hear the inner cry of woman, which he voiced with amazing poignancy in his short stories, plays, poems, and songs. He broke with convention by highlighting issues of feminine sexuality or woman's innate strength, which made them often superior to men in judgment and prescribed path-breaking roles for them. I will mention here, and this is the end of my presentation, the revolutionary stand taken by Tagore to introduce dance among his women students. In fact, he took the lead in dancing himself by introducing the necessary hand and foot movements, and subsequently had tutors from Tripura and elsewhere to add to the dance repertoire of his students. Because of its association with courtesan culture, dance was not viewed favorably by the educated middle class model of culture at the times. It was a challenge for Tagore not only to introduce dance into his dramatic compositions, but to train women students to participate in them and travel all over India and abroad with them. Often Tagore was seated on the dais, offering encouragement to his women students as they performed. And also, and this is very important, he made artistic performances commercially viable by ticketing them. And this dismayed many, including Gandhi, who had sent Tagore an amount of 60,000 rupees in 1937, which was a lot of money in those days, to help tide over his financial distress. However, Gandhi was aggrieved that Tagore continued to tour with his cultural troupe for raising funds. Now, Gandhi wrote to Tagore, and I quote, he writes, "I write to you on bended knees. Please forego these begging expeditions." Tagore's reply to Gandhi was blunt and incisive, bringing out the fundamental differences in outlook that he had with Mahatma. And I end my presentation by reading out from this classic letter of 26 February 1937. Dear Mahatma Ji, possibly your own temperament prevents you to understand the dignity of the mission which I am glad to call my own. A mission that is not merely concerned with the economic problem of India or her sectarian religions, but which comprehends the culture of the human mind in its broadest sense. I expect not alms or favor, but grateful homage to my heart. And if I have to receive contribution in the shape of admission fees from the audience, I claim it as very much less than what is due to me in return for the rare benefit conferred upon them. Therefore, I must refuse to accept the term begging expedition as an accurate or worthy expression coming from your pen. Indeed, I've often thought that ICCR, where I've spent many years and where I see Mr. Goel and Hardeep, would do well to grasp this basic principle of Tagore, that art was surely twice blessed, blessing those who performed and those who were privileged to enjoy it. And there should be a token payment to express appreciation for the favor that was being given. when outstanding artistic programs were not ticketed, they tend to get valued less. And I've seen so many programs of ICCR where the best artistic presentations were made, where we would be standing hoping against hope that the halls would be filled. I think a little token amount gives greater value. But it's just my own thought. And now I end the song. I end the song which Indrananda mentioned, sung by Tagore to Gandhi in 1932 in Yaravata jail in Pune, as the Mahatma decided to break the long fast he had undertaken against the communal award. And Tagore's translation of this song appears in his Nobel-winning collection, Gitanjali. And I must add here that when Tagore rushed to Yaravata jail by train, he was not in good health himself, and he was suddenly asked to sing this song. I mean, Mahatma broke his fast and Indira Priyadarshini gave him some orange juice, and suddenly the poet was asked to sing a song. He'd actually forgotten the tune of this song. And nonetheless, he composed it on the spur of the moment and sang it. But later on, of course, that was rectified in the staff invitation that came out. Sorry. We spoke about how universal Tagore's message is always. And this particular song is so relevant to present times, when the world is struggling with a frayed ecology, with tensions of all kinds, which is besieging the world over. Tagore's translation of the song in his own Gitanjali. When the heart is hard and parched up, come upon me with the sharp mercy. When grace is lost from life, come with a burst of song. When tumultuous work raises its din on all sides, shutting me out from beyond, come to me, my Lord of silence, with thy peace and rest. When my beggarly heart sits crouched, shut up in a corner, break open the door, my king, and come with the ceremony of king. When desire blinds the mind with delusion and lust, O thou holy one, thou wakeful, come with thy light and thy thunder. I must thank you, Shalini, for the harmony.
Thank you.
Language and identity, reconsidering Tagore and Gandhi.
I think that was a hard act to follow. But I think there's a link between the language of music and the subject of my paper, because if we talk about language and identity, I think of course that for Tagore, language was not just about words. For his creative imagination, there was the language of words, but there was visual language of his paintings, there was the language of music, and there was the body language of dance. So if you understand language in this way, then perhaps I think this marvelous presentation opens the way for mine, which is about one aspect of the Tagore-Gandhi debate, which I want to focus on, but not just via their direct interchanges, but to say a little more about their understanding of language and identity as crucial aspects of the evolution of the individual and collective human psyche. I want to begin by just quoting a little from both of them, and these are not from their own direct exchanges with each other. In fact, early on in 1909, Gandhi had argued that the character of the people is evident in its language. He said, from the point of view of language, Gandhi expresses his awareness of the link between language and identity. He also makes it clear that identity is something to be constructed within specific circumstances. The early Tagore is equally aware of the role of language in the shaping of our sense of self. In 1895, speaking of the way exposure to English education has revitalized the Bengali psyche, he says, and I quote, "All these days, that submerged divers, we have to draw air to a snorkel from the literary sky of England. We have not cast away the snorkel as yet, but with the slow infusion of life in us, air has begun to flow all around. There is now a rising wind of native literature in our native language." So issues of language and identity form the whole aspect of the debates between Tagore and Gandhi. And these ideas need to be contextualized in relation to the larger histories and conflicts within which they were framed. But they also spill over beyond that context to raise pertinent questions for us in today's world. An important question addressed in these debates concerns the relative values of education in English and education in the mother tongue. The context here is Gandhi's call for the boycott of government schools where the medium of instruction was English. Tagore argues that Gandhi's rejection of Western modes of learning smacks of what he calls the worst kind of provincialism. Gandhi, in English Learning, published in Young India in 1921, says that this does him a great injustice. English, he insists, is sought after by Indian boys because it is associated with commercial success, political power, and access to government service, while Indian girls are taught English as a passport to marriage. He deplores this as a sign of what he calls slavery and degradation. Government schools, he complains, have turned Indians into what he describes as clerks and interpreters. These differences notwithstanding, Tagore and Gandhi have no essential disagreement about the importance of learning one's mother tongue. Both, for instance, feel that learning a foreign tongue places a tremendous burden on the child and destroys the joy of learning. Gandhi says, and I quote, "The foreign medium has caused brain fat, put an undue strain upon the nerves of our children, made them crammers and imitators, unfitted them for original work and thought, and disabled them for filtrating their learning to the family or the masses. The foreign medium has prevented the growth of our vernaculars." He declares the strength, declaring, "If I have the powers of a despot, I would today stop the tuition of our boys and girls through a foreign medium." Like Gandhi, Tagore too deplores the struggle it takes for an Indian child to acquire English, a foreign tongue. He calls it, and I quote, "the hailstorm of the grammar of a foreign language learning by rote." He insists it is difficult either to receive or to express in the language of others. In the essay, "The Music of the Vowels," which I have recently translated, Tagore says, and I'll just quote this from here, he says, "To merge completely into a uniform oneness means total dissolution. Hence, if our literature wants to live, it should strive to learn how to be Bengali." He says, "The language of emotions cannot be translated. The dry language of scholarship can be cast into a mold and its image reproduced. But the language of the heart grows and matures like a human child, nurtured by the milk of human emotion, rocked in the cradle of human joys and sorrows. Hence, it has a life of its own. Pouring it into a mold, a lifeless replica of it can be produced, but that has no capacity to move. It remains static as a stone, a dead weight in the heart." While the dead weight of textbook language is regarded as instrumental, the language of the heart is here projected as having a close relationship with the development of the psyche and hence of one's sense of identity. Tagore, as we know, was a school dropout. As a child, therefore, he resisted routine learning by rote, including the routine learning of English, and enjoyed the freedom of access to the Bengali language, which he says later served him wonderfully. He says the fasting mind had not for a long time to go on limping upward the path of the foreign language. For Gandhi too, the argument is about language and identity, but it is most violently couched in terms of the opposition between Indian nationalism and British anti-imperialism. Hence, in his call for non-cooperation, it tends to polarize the foreign language and the mother tongue as either-or alternatives, saying India has to flourish in her own climate and scenery and her own literature. We and our children must build on our own language. If we borrow another, we impoverish our own. We can never grow on foreign business. Tagore, though in favor of education in the mother tongue, endorses a broader approach. He disagrees with Gandhi's push for the boycott of government schools as a way of countering English dominance because he feels that there were no other viable education options open to the masses. In a letter to C.L. Andrews between 1921, he says, and I quote, "Our students are bringing their offering of sacrifices to what? Not to a fuller education, but to non-education. No, in its passive moral form, is asceticism and in its anti-moral form is violence. The desert is as much a form of insult or negligence as is the raging sea or storm. They both are against life. He critiques the Gandhian model of non-cooperation, saying, and I quote, "A present struggle to alienate our heart and mind from the West is an attempt at spiritual suicide." He makes the plea, "Let us be rid of all false pride and rejoice at any lamp being lit in any corner of the world, knowing that it is a part of the common illumination of our house." Gandhi too remains open to the idea of exposure to other cultures, but his prioritizing of Indian culture is succinctly articulated. He says, "An appreciation of other cultures can fitly follow, never precede an appreciation and assimilation of our own." He argues, and I repeat a bit of something that was earlier read out by Professor Tagore. "I do not want my house to be boring on all sides, my windows to be stuffed. I want the cultures of all lands to be blown around my house as freely as possible. But I refuse to be blown off my feet by any." And he says that he doesn't mind young men and women of India going and learning English or any other languages of the world, but they should then give the benefits of their learning to India and to the world. He says, "I would not have a single Indian to forget, neglect, or be ashamed of his mother tongue, or to feel that he or she cannot think or express the best thoughts in his or her own vernacular." Gandhi's campaign against English is thus part of a larger endeavor to construct a national identity for the people of a subjugated land. Tagore's position is different because in his worldview, a broad humanism overrides the demands of nationalism. We have heard from the preceding speakers about how he first actively participated in Swadeshi and then he withdrew from it, and began to express his political views completely through his creative writings. His university, Vishwabharati, for instance, expresses the will to create, and I quote, "fundamental conditions of world peace through the establishment of free communication of ideas between the two hemispheres. And with such ideas in view, provided Shanti-Niketan, a center of culture where research into and study of religion, literature, history, science and art, of Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, Islamic, Sikh, Christian and other civilizations may be pursued along with the culture of the West, free from all antagonisms of race, nationality, creed or caste, and in the name of the one supreme being who is Satnam Shivam Advaita." Despite his championing of the mother tongue, Tagore does not entirely dismiss the value of English education in India. In the essay Bengali National Literature, a lecture delivered in 1895, he argues that contact with the foreign culture has revitalized Bengali culture, and he feels that the onus is on the Indian intelligentsia to draw upon this cultural interchange in a discriminating fashion. He says, "English education is now inextricably fused with our society. We have thus acquired the right to judge freely what in it is good and what evil, what is major and what minor." Gandhi claims that exposure to one's own language brings one closer to indigenous tradition and culture, thereby enriching the mind. In turn, he says, this generates a mass awareness that is valuable for the spirit of nationalism. It also opens up the possibility of mass education, reducing the gap between haves and have-nots in society. He argues that this is a way, quote, "to remove the growing intellectual and cultural gulf between men and women and between the classes and the masses." Gandhi's egalitarian impulse thus relates the language question to the process of democratization of knowledge. In his book, The Illegitimacy of Nationalism, Ashish Modi speaks of three basic contradictions that Tagore and Gandhi, as the makers of modern India, had to negotiate. Contradictions between East and West, between tradition and modernity, and between past and present. According to Gandhi, Tagore sought to resolve these contradictions at the level of high culture, Gandhi at the level of the low. This, I feel, is an oversimplification, but but Gandhi does not discount high tradition, and Tagore, in the course of his evolution as a writer and thinker, strives to combine the classical with the popular or the local. Tagore in his own way promoted the democratization of language via his introduction of Chalit Bhasha of the local Bengali to the Bengali domain, which Sadhu Bhasha of classical Bengali had previously held sway. In the essay Chondo or Rhythm, published in 1931, he says, and again I'll just read a small bit from my translation of it. He says, the ground of colloquial Bengali is not even. If not according to the laws of Sanskritized formal Bengali, then by its own laws, it has its own clear undulations like the waves of the ocean. This couplet of colloquial Bengali has found its natural expression in women's nursery rhymes, vow songs, and the verses of Brahmavasa. But because it has not gained respect in classical Bengali, it has not been able to tell the world all about itself, and the full extent of its power remains unknown. Tagore uses gender terms to describe this linguistic hierarchy, saying the lively natural resonance of colloquial Bengali verse when it encountered Sanskritized Bengali, what we call formal Bengali, found itself confined within four walls like a woman in Parda, kept within the zanana, the secluded quarters reserved for women. The reason being that classical Bengali is an artificial language, where external rules reign supreme, while the laws of its own nature are often circumscribed. In another essay called Bhasha Katha or About Language, published in 1917, Tagore uses the metaphor of the railways, how there's a difference between the broad gauge and the meter gauge, and he describes how on two banks of the Padma, on one side of the broad gauge, and then you have to get off the train and change into the meter gauge train. And he talks of the difficulty that this represents. He uses this to describe the gap between classical and colloquial Bengali, saying the passage of ideas is through language. For some time now in Bengal, groups of two different gauges have been current in the language. One of them is the way of the spoken tongue, the other of the literary language. Literature, according to Tagore, survives its contact with the language of the common people, where the life of the universe keeps revealing itself moment by moment. So Gandhi and Tagore may differ on many counts, but each in his own way recognizes the power of language to bridge diverse forms of social and cultural difference. Both of them also understand the need to strengthen the patterns of multilingualism in India. In the 1930s, even while advocating a national language for official purposes, Gandhi remains insistent on the importance of regional or provincial languages of India. Tagore too is emphatic about the importance of being receptive to multiple cultural and linguistic traditions. Although his primary literary output is in Bengali, his English writings are substantial, and in his early poetry, he also experiments with poetry and repetition. So Tagore can be seen as an exemplar of the rich multilingual tradition of the Indian Renaissance, a period when many Indians articulated their explorations of ideas with equal felicity in three languages: English, Sanskrit, and a vernacular. So Tagore does not see multilingualism as an impediment to the intellectual unity of the culture. He regards this diversity as one of the strengths of the land of different peoples with many different languages. Both Tagore and Gandhi also underscore the importance of translation. For Gandhi, translation offers a way of accessing other languages and literatures. He argues that there is no need to learn a foreign language if we can read foreign literature via translation into the vernaculars. He says, I do not need to learn Bengali in order to know the beauties of Rabindra's matchless productions. I get them through good translations. Gujarati boys and girls do not need to learn Russian to appreciate Tolstoy's short stories. They learn them through good translations. Why need I learn English to get at the best of what Shakespeare and Milton wrote? Translation is also an important aspect of Tagore's search for intercultural connectivity. He not only translated his own writings into English, also attempted to translate Kavi and Shakespeare into Bengali. His own work attained international fame primarily through translation. He was awarded the Nobel Prize for his writings in English, including works in translation. It is largely due to indifferent translations as well that his reputation subsequently fluctuated across the Western world. Hence, he was acutely aware of the role that translation played, both in creating his stature as a world-leading figure and also in the controversies that dogged him all his life. He was also diffident about his own competence in English and his abilities as a translator. His travels worldwide convinced him of the importance of translation as a form of communication and connectivity. Clearly then, for Gandhi, translation provides an argument for strengthening relations between indigenous languages, while for Tagore, it functions as an instrument for a wider international web of cultural relationships. The dialogue between Tagore and Gandhi never led to a direct resolution of their arguments about language, education, and identity. Yet, both understood the place that language occupies in the formation of identities and the operations of power. What can we recover from this unresolved dialogue that is meaningful for us today? Language continues to be a primary issue in debates about education. Today, the field of debate has expanded to include questions about the relationship between national and regional languages and the place of local dialects not granted the official status of languages. In our globalized, digitalized world, English and other European languages have come to occupy an even more powerful position, and the question of finding a balance between local, regional, national, and international systems of communication has become even more complicated. In today's scenario, the question of translation has also acquired greater urgency. It would not be wise to read Tagore and Gandhi out of context in ways that dehistoricize their arguments. Yet, it remains possible to draw from their ideas inspiration to look anew at our own linguistically divided and increasingly more hierarchical world.
Thank you. I am very grateful to Mother Cecilia for inviting me here. It's truly only because of her that I am here today. But she is also very generous and very understanding. She has invited 5 brilliant scholars so that, she being one of them of course, so that the work of the chairman is there is nothing to say. Everything has been said. But, and also easy for the participants, because if you open so many questions, then you are free to discuss and observe and ask questions if you like. These 3 papers, Vasavi was the first one, Vasavi Teresa. Her main point was that spirit of the nation, nationalism is not just nationalism, it means the spirit of the nation. And between Gandhi and Tagore, one had political power, the other was intellectually eminent. And both contributed to, or both concentrated on, that's the main archetype, truth and love. Is that right? And to Tagore, of course, inner self was important, outside world was Maya, while Gandhi was more concentrated on the outside world. And she finishes with beautiful comparison to Reva, who charmed us by her music and also by her scholarship, she said that the debates created an intellectual environment for intellectual discourse. Second point, very important point, that they complemented each other. This point we have to mention, they complemented each other. And thirdly, while Tagore was for culture, more for cultural cooperation, emphasis on non-cooperation was really taken out of his cultural cooperation. And finally, she mentioned, Reva mentioned, the differences in attitude towards women, and concluded with advocacy for art and music. And Radha Chakraborty presented an excellent paper, Language, how it is associated with nationalism, even with state consciousness. This is one this point of view, invention in. And we know Tagore's contribution to Bengali literature. Actually, what Bangla I speak today is Telugu Bangla. What I write in Bangla is Telugu Bangla. He sort of created the whole Bengali language. Yet, unlike Gandhi, both of them stressed the importance of mother tongue, but Gandhi was more for, just for mother tongue as Tagore was for English expression as well. And Radha pointed out the importance of translation. I think personally, they were the same. With all your great contribution, yes, it's true it's going to make us communicate with the entire world. Otherwise, how would you would not also go across the boundaries of the state. But at least for me, I have read Tagore in Bengali. So I just can't read it in translation, even done by him. Because I know it's important. The poor Bengali, exists for me both the dilemma and the difficulty. So, and today, language has become such a hot issue. We have to, such a political issue. It's taking the same form as nationalism, the debate of nationalism. The debate of language is very important, and we can find that the problems as well as the solutions. Now, open to the house. Please make your observations or questions, introduce yourself. May I ask first a question? Please.
I am not really part of the discussions here. We are not today. But what I have to say, I'm going to back to we developed party ICR, we organized the 150th Club University. And I see so many presentations here, so many presentations here, that I really just can't restrain myself from recalling the day and saying something here. I think, the discussions just from what I know about Gandhi, but my views in South Africa, as a book, because when I was created, more after coming to ICR. But there is one fundamental difference really which I noticed. And then once I begin to recognize there are different responses to situations. Gandhi was at the basic, at the essence of it. Gandhi was a politician. Gandhi believed in mobilizing people to achieve the independence of the country. He had protected that art in South Africa where he proved every possible he has some power to move and mobilize people in South Africa. He brought the same experience to India. And everything he said, okay, whether the charkha, hazards, culture, they were all basically related to mobilizing. Tagore, in contrast, his humanity, or what I know about him, was more about building the national language. For him, creating a national identity, building a cultural identity was at the core of developing the Indian nation. So independence was not the primary concern. For him, the primary concern was building of an Indian national identity. And I think if we look at these two different approaches, it is a narrow man at this different approach, consider different things. When the art is I just said, I need to respond to that. I think the problem is that we in India have begun not to provide patronage, not to arts or culture, but to people. When we provide patronage to people, we need to do to make sure that those people have the kind of patronage that we pay for it. That thing doesn't have to belong to where people do not have expectations. When you go to a city, in
but they foresaw the important place that it would occupy in the India of the future. And it was in 1939 that Hindi Bhavan was established in Shanti for the promotion and propagation of education in Hindi alongside other languages, including and today Chinese, learning of Chinese is assumed supremacy in India. So Tagore had this kind of PCS and he did understand the position of Hindi. Regarding Gandhi, he knew of course about how he propagated the idea of Hindi and Hindustani and combination as a soil of India. We know about his debates with Annie Besant, who was actually arguing in favor of provincial languages and provincial identities and the idea of dividing India along linguistic lines, linguistically these provinces. These are well-known questions, but we do see an overlap here where in the debates per se, the direct debates that we have been talking about, there is thing of mother tongue versus English because the immediate context was the boycott of government schools by Gandhi. But later, as we move towards the 1930s, and of course it was demised in 1941, but by then questions of association of national identity with the idea of a common language are also being debated, and yes, there is a still overlap.
Any other question? Yes, please.
Gandhi wrote a letter to Tagore. I am invited to chair in this Sahitya Akademi annual event on the Atlantic. What should I tell them? Firstly, about the national language. What kind of relationship there between the national language and other languages? Like we raised 3-4 questions and said this correspondence is at the beginning of the book by Ferozeshah on letters of Tagore. In that, Tagore writes, within 3 days Tagore writes that we will have to firstly say that Hindi is the national language of the government. We have to further say that Hindi has an extra responsibility. You see, all the languages along with women. Third thing he said that it cannot be a political language because people who are involved in politics cannot speak Hindi. All the people cannot speak Hindi. So in the political arena, English will have to be maintained. But for general problem, this is the first thing. Secondly, for Hindustani. Hindustani, the Muslims and Hindus, they decided in Uttar Pradesh that there should be a Bhayagi given to contain the sentiments of the Muslims, and they found it in Hindustani. But with Lucknow Pact, there was a tremendous opposition against Hindustan. And in 1936, Ferozeshah was both a writer of Urdu and Hindi. In 1936, in a similar function where Ferozeshah was present, this question was raised whether should we accept Hindustani as a national language by 23, and lots of Muslims are present, but by 23 and 15 votes, the Hindustani lost its status as been indicated. But one of the purists of Hindi literature, Vidya Mishra, even the person who always was Sanskrit, always of Hindi, in 1999, said before his death, had
during that time, Mrs. Mali would have accepted as the national language of this country. This country would have resolved its language problem forever.
Thank you. Any other question, any other comment? Please, Nimon, did you want to mind? Yes, please.
Gandhi, the political strategist, and Tagore being a cultural historian, there is something extremely political about Tagore. In many of his plays, right from Dr. Parvati, I've done a little work on that. So Dr. Parvati, Bhavan, Rafi Roshi, he is definitely talking about some kind of uprising of the underprivileged. So there is something very motivating to those kind of motivating as a creator to those plays. Apart from that, I think in one instance, when we're talking about Bhavan, that the short story, there is also an immense political debate going on in the country about the extremists and the moderates. So I think Tagore has intervened very strongly for the moderates when he talks about supporting Swadeshi and World Cup, not World Cup. So I think there is something very important in those, that kind of thinking of Tagore. And rather for just a little bit of an interest, I thought of Sahitya Akademi, and when you were talking about by rote, I thought that's a very beautiful instance of how one parrot goes by rote and the other parrot goes by the freedom of outside the cage. If you get a chance to read. There's a poem on that also. So I just thought, because I belong to the discipline of political science, and I read a little bit of work on the political interval, it's important to see him as very much a part of the political system.
Anyone else? Anyone else? Just to follow up on please. The other thing was, of course, the essays against nationalism. And the amount of, even in a sense, you can read The Home and the World as a comment against centralized nation state and the idea of developing alternative forms of political community. So I think she's right that there was a lot of the political, and it's difficult to speak about him entirely in cultural terms. I think what Rataji, the kind of point that she was making about language and identity, I think obviously you had in mind these political undertones into it. Thank you. Yes, sir. That is the last one we'll take because nothing but all.
One thing I want to submit here, I think you say that in detail. He told Tagore that संख्या गरिष्ठता किसी भाषा की श्रेष्ठता नहीं, इसलिए हिंदी उस रूप में श्रेष्ठ नहीं है जिस रूप में हम इसको आज देखें। इसलिए one second, you should have mentioned about the issue of Vyasa. To promote Varnadu or to promote unity, he initiated the publication of issue of Vyasa to educate the masses of the students. What about 25%? Like watercolor.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else?
No, one word. It is a law, but I will. We are discussing about nation. I have mentioned this thing. I will take everything.
It's a long time, sir.
Just 1 minute. रविंद्रनाथ के अनुसार हम अंग्रेजी के नेशन, रेस, ट्राइब, कास्ट, जीनस, स्पाइस इन 6 शब्दों को जाति द्वारा अनुदित करते हैं। इस भाषा में इससे भाषा में शिथिलता मैंने प्रतिशब्द वाले इस्तेमाल जो लेती was published for only 2.5 years with another particular issue. और उन्होंने submitted his own terminology, nation, अधिजाति, national, आधिजाति, nationalism, आधिजाति, race, provincial, race reservation, provincial रक्षा, tribe, जाति संप्रदाय, caste, जाति वर्ग. Again we have this प्रतिशत, caste जाति, race जाति, population, प्रजन, and nation, राष्ट्र जाति. People, जनसंख्या. Yes, one. Half the please.
Thank you.
I just want to
Let
finish.
others have a chance.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes.
I wanted to ask a question of the first speaker. You had differentiated between the Bard of England and the Bard of Scotland. Do you then regard Scotland as a separate country? You know that in September 2014, they lost the referendum by a few votes.
I would like to separate the two, yes, but not political. But Scotland does have 3 languages, Gaelic, Scots and English. England is one. As a resident in Scotland, I have to say that like the question of partition, during the referendum, families were divided about the vote. In my family, my father, my husband, and my daughter were all going to vote for staying in England. I, as a writer and poet, believe in freedom, and I felt that if the Scottish nation felt it wasn't free, let them be free. In the end, when I went to vote, I had to vote for my daughter, a proxy vote, and she was really angry. She said, "Mom, I don't know whether I can trust you. You might not vote as I want you to." So I voted for her yes. And I stood there for 2 minutes and I voted for my daughter for the next generation. I voted yes.
But they won.
So that, yes.
But the fight still goes on, and Scotland does want to be independent.
Anyone else?
Yes.
Anyone else? Anyone else? Please? No question, no comment, nobody else? Okay. Then, as I said, I have nothing to say. Everything has been said. But, okay, I like the bad letters in chair. I have to say just 2 minutes, 3 minutes like this. Now what to speak on? Everything has been said. I have nothing to try. I could speak on women. Yes, that's which is my specialization, but Manasi is going to present a paper on women. So what I will make this only 1 or 2 points is this. Well, they agree to disagree. Well, they are very close, very cordial relationship, much in common. All this is true, we have heard. The main similarity was that they drew inspiration from the same source, Indian heritage, Indian history. And they both made permanent contribution to Indian polity and culture. Differences were, Mother Gupta said, Kashmir mentioned, that there are differences in methods, the different methods. But I personally think that differences were more fundamental. More fundamental because I'll just give 2 points. One, already mentioned by Indranath, that one wanted social reform, the other wanted political reform. a great difference. Tagore said, I don't know if you mentioned this, that Tagore said that if you have political, that our main problem is social events. If you have political independence first, social problems will continue to play. Which are doing now. We call it Tagore a poet and Gandhi a realist, but this has happened today exceeding in the realistic point of view. About fasting, we said that it will, I'm sorry, I fear that lesser men will use it. And non-cooperation can use is a powerful tool. All forms of power is irrational. And non-cooperation may be used for a good cause as well as for a not so good cause. Take care. So, Rabindra made a very good point that though Tagore spoke about rural reform, about Samaj, not the state but the Samaj, but actually Gandhi had a touch with the villages. With rural people, he had a solid touch which Tagore lacked. Tagore knew this. He wrote, "Amar Professor Janyami Mainachi Sharvatra Rani." My poems have been received by many, but yet it has not reached all people. Devotees was acutely conscious that it is Samaj, it is the civil society which needs to be reformed first. Before political reform. That is the point. Before political, not in Swaraj. First of all, Samaj, Swadesha Samaj. Think of the civil society first. The second thing I feel personally, that Tagore, to call Tagore a nationalist is not right. He was actually a good nationalist. He was a nationalist as you said, Rema mentioned in the Swadeshi movement, but he withdrew. Withdrew, why? Because he was a universal man. সব ঠাঁই মোর ঘর আছে, আমি সেই ঘর মনে খুঁজিয়া, দেশে দেশে মোর দেশ আছে, আমি সেই দেশ লম খুঁজিয়া। In every land I have my home. In every country I have my country. If that is so, if you have your home in every land, how can you be confined to one nation and one nationalism? Gandhi said, I think you quoted and you also quoted, Rashid also quoted, that cultures of all lands, all cultures must, through my window can come, but I refuse to be swept off my feet. That is different. Cultures of all other cultures. To feel, I am at one with them. I am at one with them. Vishal Vishwe Charidik Hode Pratikara Paritansi. In this world, every corner, because I am at one with every land, grass, with tree, with flowers, with the rivers. That is being at one with all, not only cultures of other countries. Other countries, there is no other country, every country is my country. That is a different outlook altogether from liberalism, from international, in some other ordinary form of international organization. He was a world citizen. And finally, most importantly I think, the concept of freedom was different. To Gandhi, it was national freedom. To Rabindra, it was freedom of the individual. It was freedom of the soul. Chitta Ditha Vaishnu Chittashi, that famous poem, there is no word about independence. But this is the India that I dream of, where man is free, knowledge is free, where one can walk, goes backward straight. This is India. And therefore he was for individual, to him the most important person was man. And that poem you love very much, which I written after the Passion Play 17, where she says that the sun stays for the fall on the newborn. And the poet sings, victory to the newborn, victory to man. And Abu Soyadai, who visited he read the original translation, right? Gita Gita translation, and decided to read it in the original and learn Bengali and became one of Bengal's most tasty linguistic writers. I personally think that he understood Tagore better than most of his contemporaries. He says that this newborn is not Jesus or any God or any avatar in the field. He is the universal man. And Tagore sang about the universal man. And in his last days, last few poems, he wrote, Holy Muhammad Duarte, hoping all the time that Muhammad, the great man, the universal man, in that day. And therefore both were great people, no doubt. Anybody would know. They are both great, both made permanent contribution to India, but they were different. And let us have a group photo. I think it will be good. Such good participation.
It's been an absolutely fascinating session. Thank you everybody, chairs, speakers, and the audience. I just requested Gitanjali, can we all just get together for a group photo? It's wonderful to see such a large and
Participating audience.